Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen and get rolling. So actually, one more slide deck. Got my intro, DevOps intro slides. So give me just a second to bring those up. Just to walk through what it is, who we are, and what it is we're doing here. So Spokane Tech Groups is a couple of meetups sponsored by IntelliTect, .NET Users Group, which meets occasionally, sometimes, here and there. Been some debate about a potential November meetup around Microsoft releasing .NET 8. I get that right? Yep. Didn't sound right when it came out of my mouth, but yeah, .NET 8. But not a lot of planning has gone in, so I'm not sure what's going to happen. Gone into that, so I'm not sure what's going to happen. We have a DevOps meetup, which you're currently in, and Spokane Python user group. They meet monthly. They do. Joseph does a pretty good job meeting monthly. They just met this week, I believe, or last week. Last week. Looked like an interesting topic. Dependency injection in Python. So check it out if that's interesting too. We are at IntelliTect. We're based in Spokane. We do solution architecture, software development, software design, and a lot of DevOps. A lot of the projects that we do include a DevOps component, or sometimes we just do dedicated DevOps projects. We also are teaching a DevOps class at Eastern Washington this quarter. Some of the content will be presented or discussed during that class as well. There's some overlap. We're leveraging the content a couple of different ways, as many ways as we can. We have Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Again, if the recording goes well, we'll get this posted to YouTube at some point in the future. That's the basic intro, and then what we're going to talk about today is release management. As I was, and again, I'm Phil Spokas, CTO at IntelliTect, longtime DevOps dev type person, agile project management, and so on and so forth, all kinds of stuff. As I was preparing this presentation, it's been a while since we've talked really about CI/CD, which is kind of surprising for DevOps. I've been wanting to get into GitHub deployments. Really, was really my goal here. And as I was getting into the content, reviewing sort of what we've presented in the past and the landscape, and based on some discussions with team members and feedback from team members, I found myself sort of pulling back and going back a little bit, and ending up in introduction and overview land. And that's what I'm going to cover today. I actually ended up with quite a bit of content, so I'm going to do my usual and move quickly, talk fast, and depend on the crowd here to stop me and ask questions. When I go too fast or say something that doesn't make sense, please do not hesitate to stop and let's have some discussion. I do want to reserve some time at the end to discuss some common release challenges, because that'll help prioritize what I'd like to do in the next sessions. I think there's enough content here that we can explore probably for at least one and two, probably two more sessions, getting into some of the intricacies and shortcomings of where we're at when doing deployments at GitHub. Okay, enough table setting. We'll keep rolling. Rolling. So release management. What the heck is release management? It's interesting if you look at GitHub specifically. There's really two things going on in GitHub: GitHub releases and GitHub deployments. Deployments are, neither release nor deployment really is treated as much of a first-class citizen, I would say. I mean, they are first-class citizens, I suppose, but they're not really emphasized the way Git and source management and pull requests are. but they're pretty valuable tools and pretty critical to healthy DevOps practices. A lot of us come from Azure DevOps, too long of a history in Azure DevOps, back when it was TFS, back when they just first introduced the product, but that's probably going way too far back. Um, so we have a lot of familiarity with Azure DevOps. We do a lot of Azure DevOps work, and the story in Azure DevOps around release management has evolved. And when we talk about releases in Azure DevOps, we are talking about deployments and deploying code, deploying a solution out to some environment. There are really two ways currently to do releases in Azure DevOps. What is now considered classic or legacy release pipelines. We'll talk about those a little bit later. And then pipeline deployments via YAML, or in the infamous Azure DevOps parlance, Azure DevOps pipelines, as opposed to Azure DevOps pipeline releases. But whatever. Naming is hard. We shouldn't give them too much grief over it. So I think, we say release management. Really what I'm sort of focused on is configuring a deployment and then managing a deployment. And we can configure tooling, create GitHub Actions, do various things to configure our deployments, and then we really want to manage these, right? We want to make sure that when we're deploying, our deployments are healthy. We're deploying what we should be deploying. We have state and status around the deployment. If that makes sense. So I think of configuration as one thing, actually making the deployment happen, and then managing. All right, is it working? Is it not working? Am I getting what I want out of it? Am I getting feedback, and so on and so forth? All right, so I'm going to keep rolling fairly quickly. So what is a GitHub release? A GitHub release, so again, we have this term release, but it isn't the same thing as an Azure DevOps release. A GitHub release really starts with a repo tag on a specific commit. So way tags work. So you tag a commit. That's really where a release starts. A release includes a zip of the source. Comes along for the ride. You don't add it by yourself. If you create a release in GitHub, you're going to get a zip of the source. You can also add your own artifacts or binaries to that release. And then you've got text or markdown effectively that you can put into the release. Generally what happens, and there's tooling, when you create a release, you can tell GitHub to grab issues. So this is common issues that are closed from point A to point B. That's a common thing that you'll see in a release. And when you create a release in GitHub, GitHub will do that for you. Other things that we've done with releases might include a reference to a container, a Docker container that lives in a container registry that might be used for a deployment. A release is typically tagged after a PR to a default branch. There may be manual tags that happen. There may be some other automation that happens. But typically, when releases are used, they're going to be created as part of a merge of a pull request into a default branch. Another thing to keep in mind with a GitHub release, typically, not always, but typically a user is in control of what gets deployed, right? So we talked about deployment, we talked about a release. I want to take a look at an example here, but you use GitHub, you use open source repos, you'll see releases. What I'm actually pointing at is, I think, a nice canonical example of a repo, a public open source repo that makes good use of releases and a few other things. I happen to know some of the people who contribute to this repo, and I've worked with them in the past on DevOps projects. GitHub Enterprise Importer is a tool that some of the team members here are familiar with. Actually, it will import repos and projects from other sources like Azure DevOps or Bitbucket or GitLab into GitHub. So that's what the tool actually does. And over here down lower right, again, sort of secondary to the source and branches and et cetera, are a bunch of releases. They've got 55. We've got 55 total, V 1.3.0, and again, semantic versioning with a V in front is of the version number is very common for tagging style and formatting. If I select a given release, we'll see again. If you're familiar with GitHub, you've seen these sorts of things. We've got the commit that triggered this, the actual tag on the repo, the commit hash, comments. These are again typically going to be generated by what was in the pull request or issues that were closed. There's another common way to do this. And then assets. So these assets are things that the creators of this release in this repo attached to the release, and they represent builds. In this case, these are exes or packages for various platforms that include the actual importer itself. And in fact, the GitHub importer, this is actually an extension to the GitHub command line. So it actually gets installed locally on your machine and operates as an extension to your GitHub command line. So you get some of those advantages out of it. And of course, you're going to get source code and a zip and a tar of the source code, whether you like it or not. It just comes along for the ride with the release. So, and again, in this scenario, as a consumer of this repo, I'm in control of deploying this. I can pick what my target environment is. If I have a Windows laptop or I'm putting it on a Linux machine, I'm going to grab this specific version and deploy it out. And I'm going to have that version until I take the step of going to this repo, downloading it again, and reinstalling. Again, there may well be, if they're publishing the extension, I should be able to do a GitHub or GH extension upgrade or update or whatever to get the latest version. But I also have the option of going to this repo and just downloading a specific version or not, leaving myself behind. So again, I'm in control of the environment. It's deployed all over the place. A couple of the other interesting things that I want to look at while we're here is if I look at pull requests for this repo, there's some interesting things that go on. Some nice things that they've done, which I would like to explore down the road. They have a template that they've used for their PR, which includes basically their definition of done. Did you do all these things on this repo? Can I check this list off and make sure that I've got a good, clean, healthy pull request? Because again, once I accept this pull request, I'm going to be creating a new release. So I want to make sure I've done all the stuff. And then let's see, this one, yeah, so I have unit test results. This is kind of a nice little feature. It's a custom action, as it turns out, that they're running unit tests. They're taking those results and giving them to the reviewer, right? Giving them to me. I'm not a reviewer, but I'm looking at it and going, oh, cool. They passed 783 unit tests with this results. No, with this PR. So nice to see. And then also looks like some code coverage. Are we healthy or not? We've talked about GitHub Advanced Security in the past. That would be a status check that would run in addition, which theoretically I could surface here. That'd be kind of a nice feature. I'd like this additional step of surfacing the results into this conversation tree so that I've got a good idea if I'm the reviewer of what the health of this pull request is and whether I'm going to be inclined to pass it or not. Okay, so that's really nice. Key things to point out. There are some custom actions that are required here, and I'm a let's say an engineer or a team member who's going to be involved in a pull request, right? So as a class of user, I'm, expected to be able to review code and et cetera. I'm not some random manager or release manager, probably, unless the release manager also is a developer. So something to point out, something to keep in mind for later when we talk about challenges and et cetera. Then I have a bunch of status checks, GitHub Actions that are run, that are either listed as required elements. So when I set up my branch protection rule, I said the CI builds for these 3 environments must pass. They have to run. These others, yeah, they're nice to have. They don't actually have to run for every pull request, right? So it's part of that branch protection, those branch protection policies that they can put in place, which I think we talked about last month. So everybody remembers that. So we don't have to talk about it anymore. Okay, so quick review of release. We talked about GitHub Enterprise Importer, some of those nice to haves in that pull request that really lead to a healthy, reliable, robust environment where chances are good that I'm going to get a healthy release when that pull request is merged. GitHub deployments are really a combination of things. There's a number of elements that are involved. So again, when we think about a deployment, we're thinking about, I'm taking the binary bits and I'm actually pushing them to a dedicated environment that I've set up, typically in a cloud, right? Could be AWS, could be Azure, could be GitHub, could be, dedicated machines that you have that I'm taking my solution and I'm deploying it into that environment. When we talk about deployments or Azure DevOps releases, this is typically what we're thinking about. We're using actions to deploy these solutions. GitHub environments. So typical names for environments that we have are dev, stage, prod, might be QA, pre-prod, test. There's a number of different names, and these names could be anything, but these are sort of the standard development environments that we fall into. With an environment, we can restrict which branch goes into which environment, which will tie into the way we set up branches and branch protection rules. So when we're doing deployments, we can restrict branches. That alone is nice, but if I don't protect my branches, theoretically, anybody could push something to a prod branch and have random bits going out the door. So having the ability to restrict a branch is nice, but it's not sufficient. And so as we explore the CI/CD, we want to make sure that we have a holistic sort of process set in place with branch policies, the way we set up our branching, that ties into how we're doing our deployments. I can require an approval on an environment. Approvals in GitHub environments are not very sophisticated when you compare them to Azure DevOps releases. With regards to, you can list up to 6 people or groups that will approve. If somebody approves, you're good to go. You've just approved that environment. Whereas with Azure DevOps, you have the option of saying, hey, 3 people must approve, or, all of these people or one of these people in this group must approve. So there's some really nice options there that aren't really reproduced out of the box anyway with GitHub deployments. I can set up action secrets. I can do custom protection rules. We've talked about OpenIDC Connect before. We probably won't get into it today, but in future sessions, we'll make sure that we set up OpenIDC. Again, this is a way to secure environments without secrets, which is nice to do, and I can further control in my cloud environment. And again, this depends on my cloud environment supporting this, but a number of the cloud environments do support this, including AWS, Azure, and GCP. So that gives me a further control over who I'm going to allow deploy into an environment. Okay, if I have a web server running an app, running a web service, I want to make sure that if I'm in the development environment, I only am going to allow that to deploy to dev. If I'm in a production environment, a special credential, maybe in a different subscription, can only deploy to the production environment. I can trigger deployments from actions based on successful merges with a classic sort of view. And again, part of this is protecting branches. It's not just enough to restrict the branches. I also want to protect the branches with reuse and status checks. And for today's purposes, I've got a very simple, like stupid simple sample that I'm going to go ahead and show. Is that visible? Pop it up a little bit. So I've got a repo, which happens to be a static web app that's getting deployed into Azure. And I have a couple of deployments just to show. This is a default YAML, which was really a little bit overkill. I want to change this. This was actually generated, actually Grant generated. I don't want to give him credit, but the environment created it for him, so I don't want to give him too much credit. But there's some cleaning up that we want to do here. But this deploys to a single environment in Azure, and it's actually dropping a secret in. So here's an environment variable, or a secret variable, excuse me, that is basically the deployment profile for the static website, which includes a key that gives me access to update that site. So anybody with the key can update it. Okay. Next month, we'll switch this to use IDC and probably add a couple of environments and a few other things to buff this up, let's say, and get rid of some of the extra cruft that's in here. What I do want to show today is just deploy YAML. Very simple deploy. I'm deploying on main and also dev star, so I don't have to keep doing PRs into my main branch to demo. I'm setting, again, I'm assuming that there's at least some familiarity with GitHub Actions. You've seen it before, heard me say it. So we're just going to keep rolling. If you don't know what a GitHub Action is, maybe we'll talk separately, or maybe do another session on GitHub Actions. But I'm going to assume people know. A couple of things to point out here. This is specific to deploy at the moment, and it's just for demonstration purposes. I've got a deploy to dev job that is specifying environment dev. All I'm doing is printing an environment, echoing some secrets, just to see what's in there. The quote nice thing about GitHub Actions is it's not, once I set secrets in there, it's going to start hiding the results of my secrets from the output. But the point is, if I had a secret, like for example, a deployment key, I can set that up per environment. And in my deployment script, I would say, use the secret for my my dev environment, and it would be picked up automatically because I said dev. It would pick it up out of dev, and we'll look at this again in a minute. I have a second job, which is going to test. Again, it would pick up the secret from test automatically, and prod, same thing, right? So I have 3 different secrets. I'm not calling out specifically in my deployment. That's being done for me by GitHub, allowing me to keep my secret separate from my script. What's even better in this particular scenario is use OpenID Connect. I don't have to specify secrets at all, and I can control who can deploy where on the cloud side. But again, we'll talk about that more next month. So pretty simple stuff. If I push and deploy this, I don't know that I really have a significant change here. You get the idea. Let's pop over to, I have a link somewhere, but it shouldn't take me too long. GitHub.com/phone, and I think it's this one. So this is our static website for getting jokes. If we have time, we'll look at it. Otherwise, you'll have to wait with anticipation for what this site actually looks like for next month, or come to class this afternoon. But in any event, what was I trying to do here? Actions. All right, so we're going to take a look at actions. Let's see what actually happened here. Workflow, so I screwed something up in the workflow file. Good reason. I don't know what it is. We don't care. We're going to keep moving. We see 3 different jobs. I'm getting a deploy job. I print out the environment. And then if I scroll all the way down here, so it's all the environment variables that are set. And if I scroll down to the bottom here, GitHub and Actions is saying, hey, that's a secret value. I'm not just going to display it to any rando who goes and looks at the log. Theoretically, I'm only looking at this log if I have access, but theoretically, if it's public repo, I don't, a little bit of protection there, so I don't mistakenly display a secret to somebody who's coming onto the site. So that's kind of nice. So I've got deploy to desk, deploy to prod. It looked like it did not deploy to prod. So, what did I screw up here? Oh, it was just a question of what was selected. So we just, again, we're not seeing the secrets, but theoretically, if I had secrets, I would get each of them. I want to drop back to the deploy YAML. By default, jobs are themselves are asynchronous. I stopped these from being asynchronous by saying in test that it needs the deploy dev job. So I've got a deploy dev job. Deploy test needs deploy dev. So that ensures I'm going to deploy to development before I deploy to test, and then I do the same thing with test. If you can deploy to all 3 at once, take out the needs and let your runners run asynchronously and go do your thing. And you'll have situations, in our deployment scenarios, we have situations like that where we can, either run multiple jobs at once or deploy to multiple environments at once.
If one fails, the needs will be.
It will stop everything.
Okay.
It'll stop everything. Let's take a quick look at the environments. Also, what you're looking at is a beta view. I don't know that it's all that sophisticated deployments, but let's go back to that in a second. So I want to go to settings. I go down to settings to environments, and I see that I've defined 3 environments. I could call them pretty much, whatever I want within reason. And for each environment, I've set up a couple of rules. Here, I've just added an environment secret and an environment variable. Variables, I think, are still in beta. They're just values that aren't secret. Previously, all you had were secrets. The nice thing about this is I can set up secrets at the environment level. I can set things up at the repo level or at the org level. So I can have set an org level secret that might apply to all my repos or many of my repos, and then I can decide to override it for a particular repo or override it for a particular environment. So you have defaults, perhaps, and then as you need to, you can override those.
You need special permission to see the environments.
You need build. I'm going to fall into my Azure DevOps language. Build administrator. It's not build administrator. It's the different default role. I think if you're a collaborator, you can probably see it. So it's a good question. Something I always forget because I'm not only trying different roles when I care. Most of the time, we're just going in as the owners of the repo. And hang on a second while I answer a prompt. So for example, what's your GitHub ID, John?
Dev J. Evans.
Dev J. Evans.
Developer.John E.
Oh my God.
Yeah. That's the work one. I got a shorter version.
Well, I don't care which one you give me.
All right. 9J Evans 9. You can do that one.
What's that?
9J Evans 9.
9, J. There.
There you go.
All right, so I've just added you to that repository. Take a look and let us know.
Okay, the joke you was.
Yeah, Phil Spokas / joke UI 396. So if I come down to the environments, there's another interesting thing about this. So for example, if I go to prod, and I say, I want to restrict to selected branches, and say add a branch and just say main. All right, so let's add a rule. So now this is saying I'm only going to deploy to this environment if I'm coming from the main branch. Okay, and again, I won't belabor the point too much. But if I come in here and let's see, what did I screw up in the file? Why is it complaining? I don't know why it's complaining. I'll do that just to make a change. Say demo and push. And nope. Line 19, column 14. Bars. Okay, let's try that again. Fix bars. Okay, great. Again, this is fairly trivial. Running the code. Yeah, still didn't print the variable out. I got some other syntax error. But what's interesting, if you look at that code, is when I put in, originally I just had a variable here like vars. Oh, it should be env. That's duh. Anyway, doesn't matter. Vars.deployment, in my initial sample, I would get the value out. As soon as I put secrets in here, it started giving me asterisks for both values. You know, whatever. Work in progress. I guess, you know, if you're going to default one way or the other, I think getting more asterisks than less is probably a good thing. All right, so let's take a look here at what happened. So I got a deploy to dev, deploy to test, but then prod said, nope, you're not allowed because you didn't come from the main branch. All right, so that's a very powerful protection, but really doesn't do much for me if I can just switch my branch to main and push to main, right? So now, you know, doing additional branch protection policies, that makes sense. Start to actually, you know, lock down that environment and give you reliability over and control over what's going to get deployed. Okay, makes sense. Again, that was a brief, high-level skimming of the topic. And my intent is to get into some of those samples and do more hands-on type stuff next month. Looking for challenges so that we can work on. I'm going to keep rolling. So another customer sample, I'm not going to show the code here because it's an actual customer, but just to reference how another way that we're deploying two environments from GitHub. This is a container-based deployment. There's 3 different container images that we're using in a solution. This is actually getting deployed to Elastic Container Services and AWS. Which is almost just like Kubernetes. It's a predecessor basically to Kubernetes container orchestration. Not as sophisticated as Kubernetes, but pretty nice. ECS, that is Elastic Container Services, and AWS. We're not, when our bits, our binaries, our artifacts are actually container images that we're pushing into Amazon's container registry. Okay, they get tagged, container tags as opposed to Git tags. Those images get tagged with a version and an environment, if I'm remembering it correctly. So they might initially get tagged with the dev environment. We'll eventually tag them with the release, because every dev image doesn't constitute a release. But when we push into our default branch, in this case dev, we're building a container, putting it into the registry, and deploying it into our development environment. I think we put the hash, the Git hash on there as well. So with if we know the commit, if we know the Git commit, we can look up the container that ties to that commit. Okay, so it's a nice tying of things together. We have dev test stage. I think at one point we had 5 or 6 environments. I think we're down to 4. You're only seeing 3 on the screen, but it's dev test stage and prod, I believe. So we use a GitHub action composite workflow, similar to a Azure DevOps template, but I think a little simpler to use to deploy into those environments. Because dev test stage, you're going to run the same steps every time, so you don't want to reproduce that code if you don't have to. Again, you just saw my deploy YAML. You can see how, if we actually put useful stuff in there, we're going to start to grow the script, and it's going to be the same for all the environments, except perhaps variables that will get set that will control the environments, or parameters that will pass in to say I'm deploying to dev or I'm deploying to test. We set up a branch per environment, which I'll show in a little bit. So that's how we control the flow. The branches are all protected. They might be protected. They might not be. Might just be everybody behaves themselves. It could be protected if they're not. In this scenario, a user, which ends up being either the product owner or one of the product owners, there's a couple of people who might be involved. They're making a decision to go deploy or push from dev to test, or from test to stage, or from stage to prod. And they are not GitHub users. They're not comfortable with PRs and so on and so forth. So the team built a shell script for them to do that pushing and do the magic under the covers. When they first push into test, I believe, is when a release gets created. That release generates release notes. Here's all the issues that were a part of this release. No additional artifacts are put into that. It's just that we know v4.7.5 is going to point to a specific container in the container registry, and then as we go through the environments, we know we can pull the container into the test environment or the stage environment. Gets into dev environment as part of continuous integration, continuous deployment into dev, and then off we go. And the actual, just for grins, I threw in the actual command that is used. It's a GitHub command line. It's executed from a client's machine, somebody's machine. It could be executed from a GitHub action as well. So GH release create. So create a release for me. What's the next tag? What's the current tag? And then generate notes for me. So it's going to go, what are all the issues that were marked as completed from this commit to this commit, and then list those out on the release notes. So it's real nice feature, and very handy for consumers to go look, who would that be? The product owners, stakeholders, devs, what issues actually got fixed on this release. Okay.
Is that like the titles of each of those issues?
Yeah. Again, we can go take a look at that. I think in the sample that we looked at, those didn't look like issues to me. They look like comments from the PR, which is possible as well. You can basically put whatever you want into the release notes. So kind of a handy dandy feature that GH Release create. And that's just a wrapper for an API call. So if you'd rather call the API, you can do that as well. All right, so far so good. What are we doing time-wise? Talk faster. He says to himself, you didn't think I could talk faster. I don't know, we'll see. All right, so quick review of Azure DevOps releases to compare and contrast. We have Azure DevOps release. What is it? This is really a deployment pipeline. The deployment pipelines are actually configured via the UI. They're not YAML. They're not part of the UI. It's a separate construct. Again, considered legacy or classic at this point, though still handy. You configure a connection to a build pipeline or something that's going to generate artifacts. That isn't strictly necessary, but it's generally the convenient way to do things. Very easy to integrate test results and display. You get a nice visual display of the flow. I got a small screenshot with Andrew said multiple times. I'm sure he would appreciate that if he saw me showing it. But so I'm getting it's a little bit different view. Some of the same sort of information. I don't have to tag anything. I'm getting this sort of release 61, release 60, so on and so forth by default. I can also generate release notes by default. I don't think I'm getting, they made big improvements to the summary page. That's great. Thank you very much. It looks the same to me. We'll have to check that out later. Here we just have a single stage. These could be tied to each other. I don't really want to get into too much here, but this is a pointy clicky way to do things. If I edited, I can either edit the release, edit the pipeline. If I edit the pipeline, I'm going to go back to, yeah, I don't want to do this. We don't care. Do we? May be useful. Again, if you're familiar with this, great. If you're not, I would not recommend using it going forward because it's legacy. There are going to be a couple of features or functions that can come in handy, and I don't see the functionality going away anytime soon. So it's by no way is that a hard and fast rule, but it works. It does what it does. There was one other thing I wanted to show here, and I don't remember what it was, but I don't think it's significant, so I'm not going to worry about it. Deployments and analytics. So here I get a list of all the deployments to which environment, what build, what release, and test passing rate. Now there doesn't happen to be any results here from the last 14 days, so we're not seeing anything, but it's really nice to have all that view here. What I'm getting in this deployment is sort of next level from what I'm getting in GitHub. So, and again, any stakeholder or not stakeholder, but different roles can come in here, point and click around and actually click on buttons to approve deployments and releases, which is a very nice feature that really only exists out of the box in releases. You can achieve the same result in GitHub pipelines, which we'll talk about, but it's more work. Okay, you have a lot more hand coding or custom actions or shell script, right? So somebody built a shell script so that to give me the ability to do a release. If I'm, let's say, just a stakeholder or product owner, whereas here I can actually, again, we don't really show it here, but if there was approval, I could go in and click a button to say advance this release to the next stage. I'm happy with it, and I've got some surfacing of the quality of the release here as well. I've got some idea of how healthy it is. Not a great idea, but some idea. Better than I have in GitHub out of the box without doing exploratory and writing notes on a notepad to figure out, how healthy is my release. Should I be releasing this or not? I don't know. How do I know? What tells me whether it's good to go, that I can release from dev to prod? Or do I have enough, have I invested enough in automated infrastructure to, I can trust the automation. It will fail if the release isn't good enough. So we talked about this classic legacy Azure DevOps pipelines, pipeline releases. There's also Azure DevOps pipelines. which is YAML committed to a repo. It looks very similar to what we looked at with the GitHub Actions, where I'm specifying an environment that I'm going to deploy into in the YAML. I get some similar views. Building out features and functionality. Microsoft has been building out features and functionality into the Azure DevOps pipeline experience with regards to approvals and et cetera, but it still is not as sophisticated as, at least with regards to the UI. Again, because it's YAML, because I can, put script in and there's some ways to customize it, I can achieve similar results. I would argue it's not as easy in GitHub, because in GitHub, if I want a custom action, I just drop a reference to a repo and bang zoom, I'm done. If I want a custom action in Azure DevOps, I got to go to the store, install it. Or if I'm writing one myself, there's a lot of process overhead to actually adding an action that I would, a custom action, let's say, that might do special stuff in Azure DevOps. Having said that, there's a lot in the marketplace that you can just pull and use. So, under most normal circumstances, it's almost irrelevant. So I can have one workflow. I can use templates, which are not the same thing as reusable workflows, similar in concept, not exactly the same thing in practice, but I can use templates if I've got, again, here you see multiple different stages. I don't have to reproduce the code every time if it's similar and just I'm passing a parameter to say deploy to dev or deploy to test or to deploy to pro. If we take a quick look at this, we get the live view. This happens to be our IntelliWiki. And if I drop into it, I can see various stages. Each stage can have a job. So this is another layer of management that GitHub has, or that Azure DevOps has, that GitHub doesn't. We can argue how relevant it is. Stages are nice, but the jobs are still in concept the same. Their jobs can run asynchronously. They're completely independent of each other. They can run on different agents. So stages allows you to group things together, but there really isn't much more to it. So we're doing some interesting things in here, executing through stages. Some of the really nice things about this, I can see test summary, right? As part of the user experience on the build, when we looked at that on GitHub, it was part of the pull request, right? And that was a custom action, actually. But this is cool. I can see, I got some idea of health, how we doing here. So I might be inclined, if I'm prompted for, promote to the next environment. Yeah, test looks good. So that's maybe one of my criteria for promoting bits to an environment as let's say a stakeholder or product owner or something like that. I can have associated pipelines and code coverage that is built right into the environment. So this is really nice view, nice UI. Not present in GitHub Actions. I don't know what their plans are. I check somewhat frequently, not frequently enough to be confident to be able to say where they're at with some of these things. But this is kind of cool. And then I wanted to take a quick look at the pipeline because there's some interesting stuff in it. So let's click this. How long does it take me to get to edit? There it is. Fascinating that all that stuff is just done in a few steps here, but it's making use of templates to make this a bit more usable and reusable. Interestingly enough, when I first looked at this, I would have expected, oh, great, the templates are being used. I would have expected, one template for deployment that would pass in a parameter, but that's not what's being done here. We actually came up with different templates because different things are being done in each of those stages. And you can see environment prods. So if I go back to the repo real quick, files, pipelines, so we can see the templates. So let's just look at the dev deployment template, for example. We have very similar syntax, not the same syntax, but very similar syntax, specifying YAML syntax between GitHub and and Azure DevOps, I have a development environment that I'm going to, and various other things. Again, we won't go through all the steps, but doing a build, doing a deploy out to a Azure service. Okay, some of the way some of the service connections are managed is different as well. In current pipelines, I can actually in YAML reference the service connections. In the classic pipeline, I have to go through a manual configuration for a service connection and attach it to that release. So it's another bit of setup and configuration. How often do you do it? Not that often. So how big of a deal is it? Nah, whatever. If you do the point and click 3 times for the entire life of the project, who cares? If you're doing it every day, it could get bothersome.
You reference them by name in the YAML.
Yes, reference them by name, exactly. And it'll do a lookup. And again, this is a fairly recent invention. Wasn't there all the time. So if you're familiar with the YAML pipelines from the early days, they did work a little bit differently. They're trying to be more like GitHub, maybe because it's all the same people who are building both products, or similar people anyway, owned by the same company, yada, yada. Okay, I'm ripping. He's rocking, he's rolling. I'm not getting to branching. I'm gonna go through this really quickly and then we'll revisit it next month because there's a couple of key concepts here and challenges and you really want to think about, by the same token, my experience is that teams overthink this and they make it way too complicated. And I don't know why. There's reasons. I have my own reasons for doing stupid things. For doing things. So we all have reasons. That's not a criticism. It's just the way it is. Really, the point is keep it simple. You can keep it simple. There's constructs around this that help you keep things clean, even with a simple branching structure. So with that preamble, let's go on. So the classic for those of us who have been around a while is Git flow. Oh, Git flow. Well, this is the original, the canonical blog post from the dude who invented it. And you'll see that note of reflection as of 3 years ago, over 3 years ago at this point, he's like, don't use this, man. It's too complicated. Use GitHub flow. And what is GitHub flow? It's like the easiest thing you could possibly do while keeping it at least a little clean and simple and, a little clean. So, the dude who wrote the thing in the first place says, don't use it. Okay. So yeah, sure. You're going to have environments and build processes and the way you build stuff where, all right, fine, you need that complexity. I don't even want to look at the diagram. It's just like I look at it and I go, I don't want to look at it. Reminds me of what's the Scrum scaled agile framework. That diagram makes me want to throw up at how complicated it is. But anyway, that's another editorial comment, which I won't remove from the video. Keep it simple. The other thing to think about, when people talk about Git, it's distributed source control. Yeah. Okay, it is, and that's great. It's very handy. But at the end of the day, a lot of things that we're talking about with regards to releases or deployments really depend on there being a primary origin, the golden origin, as it were, from which you're going to be doing builds and deployments. You're not doing this from everywhere. You pick the spot in GitHub, for example, as the place from which you're going to do builds and deployments. So distributing the source control is great for the contributors, but when it comes to the deployment side of this, you're doing it from one place. That's just, that's the way it's done. I'm trying to think of a scenario where it hasn't been done that way in my experience. I have a lot of experience. I don't have all the experience, so I'm happy to have discussions if somebody from the crowd says, yeah, well, we do, we use it this way or that way in this scenario. Great. Would love to have that discussion truly and seriously. We're here to learn stuff. I'm learning stuff all the time. Happy to hear about it. All right, so let's quickly go through branches. Actually, we're probably going to get through. We're going to go really quickly. So we have trunk-based deployment. This is amen. You've got name, you've got features, and we're going to go deploy from there and have a great time. For example, there's some different philosophies about how this is done, but again, we'll cover that next month. Another common approach is trunk-based development with release branches. So I want a little bit more control over what's going out the door. So I might pick a point, similar to tagging a release in that other example. I'm going to create a branch off of the main when I'm ready to release something. This can reduce your need to use feature flags. As an example, and it gives you a point where, hey, if you feel like compelled that you have to patch releases and not introduce anything from the main branch, then that gives you an opportunity to rationally and responsibly patch releases. Note the red line, because now once I've patched, I have to make sure that I merge that down into my main branch so my bug fixes make it into my next release. So that's sort of the downside of that. And then I can have different ways that I deploy this. If I'm doing a continuous integration from main, I'm going to go to dev and test. If I'm going from a release, I might do a stage in prod to help me with zero downtime deploys. The scenario that I talked about with GitHub, we're doing a branch per environment. So we push to dev that it does always builds a development environment, which is always changing. You wouldn't necessarily want to run QA tests because in the middle of their manual QA there, because in the middle of your test, you might get a new environment or new release, a new feature. So we use QA to control when people who are manually testing, or if you have a scheduled set of integration tests that you're not running on your integration environment, you would promote that up into a QA environment and trigger your integration and functional tests. And then when you're happy with it, you go up into prod. And then we've got classic deployment. I know we had some discussion about this, and I want to get into this a little bit more because there are ways to do, let's say ring style deployment, where I'm actually deploying to 5 environments or 10 environments or 20 environments, 40 environments, 48 environments, 47 environments, whatever it is. And we can talk about this. There's good ways to do this in both tools. One of the things that we talk about when we sort of have this release pipeline of dev test stage, typically we're building an artifact, something that's special that we build it once and we don't rebuild it for each environment. In one case, it was container images. They're static. They do not change. We have a set of binaries that do not change, and I push them into dev. If I'm happy with them, I push them into test. And if I continue pushing them down the stage if I'm happy with the bits in each of those environments. So it's an important thing to keep in mind in these scenarios that if we have artifacts that we have artifacts that we're deploying, that we built some value into them, we keep them. So options, challenges, what are some of what some of the problems are here? And again, I encourage you to reach out to me and let me know areas of interest for what we cover. But some of the questions that I want to answer going forward are, how do we know when a release is ready? That's going to vary by team, vary by how you're doing your deployments. How do we get visibility into the results of my tests? And again, going forward, I want to focus more on GitHub Actions, but we can revisit some of these other areas as it makes sense to the team here. Who approves? How do they approve? How do they know they need to approve? Are they just clicking a button? Or are they actually going to look at something to decide that something should go to plan? All interesting questions. We talked about some of the trunk-based, or some of the a little bit of trunk-based, but also pull requests. How do I know what's in what is in what release? I see release number. What does it really mean to me? Is it meaningful? Additional challenges might be, all right, I've got multiple repos or I've got a mono repo. Mono repo doesn't necessarily solve all your problems. As if I've got multiple projects in a single repo, am I deploying everything when one thing changes, or am I only deploying that one thing? And then now the question is, how are you deploying? It doesn't matter. What do you need feature flags? Some of the branch policies can minimize or reduce others. Like if you're going to main and deploying from main all the time, features are hitting main all the time, you're going to need feature flags and robust testing. So next month, what we'll probably do is revisit the branching as quickly as I can or briefly as I can, and then start to get into addressing some of these other issues and building out the branch pipeline. Sorry, you have no time for questions. I didn't allow it. I don't know how the heck that keeps happening to me.
Makes it easy for you.
Cut the slides in half. I think, yeah, that's about right. No, cut it in half.
You're just good at timing.
Hey, thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And
Thanks,
again, please reach out, give me feedback. Love to hear
Thank
about
you.
it. Love to hear it. Thank you. Talk to you. Bye.